Logic games was my worst section back when I first started studying for the LSAT, and they were a large part of the reason why I was stuck in the low 150s for far too long. I would have gotten my 175 much faster if they hadn't been on the test. But the thing is, logic games are actually the most learnable and perfectible section of the test, which raises the question, will students be getting lower LSAT scores now that logic games are no longer on the test? I'll walk you through the recent changes and what they mean for your LSAT scores going forward. For those who don't know me, my name is Steve Schwartz. I've been teaching the LSAT since 2005, and I personally increased my LSAT score from a 152 to a 175 on test day. Now, back when I first started studying, given my struggles with logic games, removing them from the test would have increased my LSAT score, and I imagine the same is true for a lot of others with humanities backgrounds like me. I personally majored in political science. However, removing logic games would likely reduce LSAT scores for STEM majors and non-native English speakers who tend to benefit more from a section like logic games that is not as language or vocabulary heavy, a bit more symbolic or mathematical in nature. The thing is, there are far more humanities majors than there are STEM majors taking the LSAT and applying to law school, so a version without logic games is easier for the typical applicant. But we should draw a distinction here because an easier LSAT doesn't necessarily make it easier to get a top score. In other words, the difficulty of the content does not dictate the difficulty of the raw score conversion because LSAC can just adjust the curve to compensate. We actually saw that LSAT scores in April and June were much lower than many students expected, and it could be that the reason for this is LSAC is looking to reduce LSAT score inflation by making the curve, the raw score conversion, a bit more difficult. In recent years, there has been a lot of LSAT score inflation due to the temporary LSAT Flex format, which was shorter and had no extra unscored experimental section. Due to the pandemic, students had more time to study, and of course, in recent years, it's become a lot easier to get accommodations for things like extra time on the LSAT. It's also become easier to retake the LSAT because it's gone from being offered only 4 times a year prior to the pandemic to now being offered 8 times per year. And so more opportunities to retake the LSAT means more at-bats, more chances to get a top score. And since law schools only take the highest score into consideration, there is plenty of incentive to retake the LSAT. So we have a couple of competing factors here. On the one hand, LSAC may be looking to reduce LSAT score inflation, which would incentivize them to make the raw score conversions a bit less forgiving. But on the other hand, because the logic game section was the most learnable and perfectible section, LSAC may want to make the curve a bit more lenient, meaning they could allow you to get more questions wrong and still get a 170 on the test. When LSAC analyzed the data looking at performance on versions of the test with logic games and without logic games, they claimed the curves essentially came out the same, while some students on an individual level would do better on one version of the LSAT than the other. In LSAC's own analysis of the data, they found that students taking the LSAT with logic games versus without logic games, ultimately the scores came out the same. Of course, on an individual level, there are significant variations since some students will prefer one version over the other, but in aggregate, the curve was nearly identical. Bottom line, of course, it is what it is. If you're taking an official LSAT going forward, you'll be taking it without the logic games section, and you'll have a second scored logical reasoning section. Instead, it's not totally clear how the logic games removal will affect LSAT medians, but one thing that is sure not to change is that LSAC will continue to be especially liberal in granting accommodations for things like extra time because they've been sued several times over the years, and by their own admission, they are granting 98% of accommodations requests, and this isn't likely to change anytime soon. And so if you're taking the LSAT going forward, you want to be fully prepared for the new LSAT format with 2 scored logical reasoning sections. And at LSAT Unplugged, of course, we're here to help you out. We're offering live online classes via Zoom, on-demand video courses, small group coaching, and one-on-one coaching. You can check out the links below to find out more and to book a call with me and my team. We'd be glad to help you out. Of course, we have completely revamped our LSAT courses and coaching for the new LSAT format. We've removed all of our logic games materials, added a whole lot more on logical reasoning, and you're going to want to devote a lot more time to logical reasoning in your prep since it'll now be 2/3 of the test. There are roughly 15 different types of logical reasoning questions, but not all of them are equally important because some show up more often than others. The three biggest types you're going to want to start with are necessary assumption, inference, and flaw. Make sure you've mastered them. Make sure you know the patterns. Make sure you know the proper perspective from which to view each section and each question type. If you join one of our programs, we will create for you a personalized day-by-day study plan, laying out exactly what to do from now until your test date, whenever you're taking it, whether it's in September, October, November, January, February, or beyond. We've got you covered. Of course, studying for the LSAT properly is not just about question stem type. It's also about the method of reasoning in the stimulus, which is why we help you make sure that you actually understand the argument because, of course, surprise, surprise, if you understand the argument, the question becomes a whole lot easier. That is what our Socratic review method is about, helping you figure out exactly what mistakes you're making and why, where your misunderstandings may be coming from, so that you can avoid making them next time around. Anyway, folks, that's all for now. Hope you found this video helpful. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.